I spent a long time believing that some things only exist in stories. A connection so quiet yet so powerful, a feeling that doesn't rush but arrives. I walked through noise, through mistakes, through empty moments that taught me patience. And then, without warning, you appeared. Not to complete me, but to recognize me. In a world that keeps moving too fast, you felt like coming home. After all the searching, all the becoming, I finally found you. I didn't wake up one day knowing I was looking for you. I thought I was just living, just moving through time the way everyone does, learning how to carry my own weight without asking too much from the world. I believed strength meant silence, that needing something unseen made you vulnerable in ways you couldn't control. So I learned how to be still. I learned how to sit with unanswered questions and not demand they turn into something meaningful. I learned how to let days pass without attaching hope to them, how to accept that some things simply don't arrive when you expect them to. I told myself that was maturity, that was balance, that was enough. There were moments when the world felt loud, full of opinions and expectations, and I chose distance instead. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared deeply about preserving what was real inside me. I watched people rush into connections, confuse intensity for depth, confuse attention for understanding. I saw how easily words were spoken and how rarely they were lived. I became careful. I listened more than I spoke. I observed patterns. I trusted time more than promises. Somewhere along the way, I stopped believing in sudden answers and started believing in slow truths. I met people who were kind, people who were interesting, people who meant well. I shared laughter, shared moments, shared pieces of myself that felt safe to give. But there was always a quiet space that stayed untouched, not empty, just reserved, like a room with the lights off, waiting for a reason to be entered. I didn't rush to fill it. I didn't decorate it with fantasies or expectations. I let it exist as it was, because forcing meaning into the wrong place only teaches you how to doubt yourself later. Time passed, and with it came lessons that didn't feel like lessons while they were happening. Loss taught me what mattered by taking away what didn't last. Distance taught me that connection isn't measured in proximity but in presence. Silence taught me that not every pause needs to be filled. I learned that love, if it's real, doesn't ask you to shrink or perform or explain yourself constantly. It allows you to arrive as you are without rehearsing your worth. I learned that the heart recognizes honesty long before the mind can articulate it. Before you, I was grounded but unfinished, whole but open. I knew who I was, but I didn't yet know who would see that without trying to change it. I didn't need someone to save me or complete me. I needed someone who could stand in the same quiet and not be uncomfortable. Someone who could listen without waiting for their turn to speak. Someone who understood that depth doesn't always come with drama, and that the strongest feelings often move in silence. When you entered my life, it didn't feel like interruption. It felt like alignment. Like something subtle but undeniable shifted into place. I noticed it not in grand moments, but in the small ones. In the way conversation didn't feel like effort. In the way silence didn't feel heavy. In the way I didn't feel the urge to explain myself, because nothing about me felt questioned. You didn't arrive with answers. You arrived with understanding. And that understanding didn't demand anything from me. It simply existed. There was a sense of recognition that didn't need history to justify it, like meeting someone you don't have to translate yourself for, like being seen without being examined. I didn't feel exposed, I felt acknowledged, and that difference mattered more than I expected. It made me realize how much energy I had spent before trying to be understood, trying to bridge gaps that were never meant to close. With you, there was no gap to cross. We were already standing on the same ground. I began to see my past differently. The waiting wasn't wasted time. The wrong turns weren't failures. Every moment of uncertainty shaped my ability to recognize what was real when it finally stood in front of me. Every disappointment refined my sense of trust. Every ending made room for honesty. I didn't arrive here by accident. Neither did you. Our paths didn't collide out of chance, but out of timing that couldn't have worked any earlier. There's a calm that comes with knowing you don't have to rush. With you, I didn't feel pressure to define everything immediately. Love didn't feel like urgency. It felt like permission. Permission to move slowly, permission to be thoughtful, permission to let things unfold without forcing them into shape. I trusted what I felt because it wasn't loud or demanding. It was steady, consistent, present. It didn't pull me away from myself. It brought me closer. I realized that what I had been searching for wasn't something to add to my life, but someone who could walk within it without disruption. Someone who didn't need to be impressed because they were paying attention. Someone who valued presence over performance. Someone who understood that the strongest bond isn't built in moments of excitement, but in moments of stillness, when there's nothing to hide behind. Finding you didn't change my world overnight. It changed the way I experienced it. Colors felt quieter but deeper. Time felt less like something I was chasing and more like something I was sharing. I wasn't looking ahead constantly, wondering what was missing. I was present, aware, grounded in the now, not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. And honesty has a weight to it, a gravity that pulls you into alignment. With yourself. I finally understood that some connections aren't meant to be dramatic. They aren't meant to be proven or announced. They simply exist, strong enough to stand without explanation. You didn't arrive as an answer to a question I kept asking. You arrived as clarity to a feeling I had learned to live with. And in that clarity, something settled inside me. A restlessness I had mistaken for independence softened. A patience I had practiced finally found its purpose. I didn't need to become someone else to be worthy of you. I didn't need to hide the parts of me that move slowly, that think deeply, that value meaning over momentum. Those parts weren't obstacles. They were recognized. And being recognized in that way changes how you carry yourself. It makes you less guarded, not because you're careless, but because you feel safe enough to be open. I finally saw that finding you wasn't the end of something long and exhausting. It was the moment everything before it made sense. The waiting, the quiet, the unanswered questions, they weren't signs of absence, they were signs of alignment taking its time. And standing here now, in this moment of recognition, I know that what matters isn't how long it took to arrive, but that when it did, it felt real enough to trust, steady enough to respect, deep enough to move forward without fear, without rushing, without needing to know every step ahead. Just knowing that this path, this presence, this connection is something I can walk NTO with honesty, with patience, with the kind of calm that doesn't need reassurance, the kind that simply exists, the kind that stays even when nothing is being said. You used to believe that love was something you chased, something you had to prove yourself worthy of by becoming louder, brighter, more impressive. I thought it arrived with certainty, with clear signs, with moments that left no room for doubt. But life has a way of undoing the ideas you cling to too tightly. It teaches you through contrast, through what doesn't last, through what feels close but never quite settles. Over time, I learned that the things meant for you don't demand pursuit. They don't ask you to abandon your nature. They meet you where you already stand. There were seasons when I questioned whether depth still mattered in a world that moved so fast, where attention was mistaken for care and constant communication was confused with connection. I watched feelings rise quickly and disappear just as fast. I saw how easily people promised forever without understanding the weight of the word. And somewhere in that observation, I chose restraint, not because I was afraid to feel, but because I respected feeling too much to give it away carelessly. I wanted something that could breathe in silence, something that didn't collapse the moment it wasn't entertained. I learned how to protect my inner world without closing it off completely. I learned that vulnerability doesn't mean exposure to everyone, but hones. Thank you with the right presence. I carried my experiences quietly, letting them shape me instead of harden me. Each connection that faded taught me more about what I was not willing to compromise. Each moment of disappointment refined my understanding of what authenticity feels like when it's absent. I didn't grow bitter, I grew precise. Before you, love felt like an idea I respected, but didn't fully trust. Not because I doubted its existence, but because I doubted its consistency. I believed in moments, not permanence. I believed in care, not continuity. I told myself that people change, that feelings shift, that nothing stays untouched by time. And while that may be true, it isn't the whole truth. Some things evolve without losing their essence. Some connections deepen instead of drifting. I just hadn't witnessed that up close. When you came into my life, there was no sense of urgency to define what we were. No pressure to label or declare or rush forward. What mattered was the way presence felt natural, the way attention didn't feel forced, the way I could speak without measuring my words, knowing they would be met with listening rather than judgment. With you, I didn't feel like I had to be interesting to be valued. I felt valued because I was present, because I was real. There was a steadiness in how we connected that stood out against everything I had known before. It didn't rely on constant reassurance. It didn't fade when things grew quiet. It didn't need an audience. It existed in the in between moments, in the pauses, in the unspoken understanding that didn't require explanation. I realized how rare that was, how unfamiliar it felt at first, and how quickly it became essential. I noticed how my instincts stopped arguing with themselves, how doubt didn't disappear but softened, how trust didn't need to be demanded because it was being built naturally, moment by moment. I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't bracing myself for distance. I was simply there, engaged, aware, open. And that openness didn't feel risky. It felt grounded, like standing on solid ground after walking on uncertain terrain for too long. You didn't arrive to challenge my independence. You respected it. You didn't try to take up all the space in my life. You shared it. And in that sharing, something balanced itself out. I didn't feel torn between closeness and freedom. I realized they weren't opposites when the connection was honest. They could exist together, reinforcing each other instead of competing. That realization changed the way I understood love. I began to see that what I had been guarding wasn't fear, but intention. I wasn't closed off. I was waiting for sincerity that could meet me at my depth. And when that sincerity showed itself through consistency rather than promises, through actions rather than declarations, it felt unmistakable. It wasn't dramatic. It was clear. And clarity has its own power. The more time passed, the more I recognized quiet ways this connection was shaping me, not by altering who I was, but by encouraging me to be fully present as myself. I wasn't shrinking or stretching to fit expectations. I was showing up as I am, and that was enough. That kind of acceptance doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in slowly until one day you realize how much lighter you feel carrying it. I stopped measuring moments, stopped asking where things were going, not because I didn't care about the future, but because the present felt complete enough to trust. I understood that rushing clarity often destroys it, that allowing something to grow at its own pace gives it roots instead of deadlines. With you, patience didn't feel like waiting, it felt like participating. I had always believed that love should feel safe, but I didn't understand how safety could still be exciting. With you, I learned that excitement doesn't have to be chaotic. It can be calm and still deeply alive. It can exist in shared glances, in thoughtful conversations, in the comfort of knowing you don't have to be anywhere else to feel fulfilled. That kind of excitement doesn't burn out, it endures. I saw how easily honesty flowed when there was no fear of misinterpretation, how disagreements didn't feel like threats, but opportunities to understand each other more clearly, how respect didn't disappear when things were imperfect. That consistency taught me more about love than any intense beginning ever had. It showed me that what lasts isn't buoy LT on constant passion alone, but on mutual awareness, on listening, on choosing presence repeatedly. I began to understand that finding you wasn't about destiny or coincidence. It was about readiness, about becoming the kind of person who could recognize depth when it appeared and not mistake it for boredom, about valuing calm without confusing it for lack of feeling, about trusting steadiness in a world that often glorifies extremes. And in that understanding, something aligned inside me. I didn't lose myself in this connection. I found a clearer version of myself within it. The parts of me that value meaning over noise felt affirmed. The parts of me that move thoughtfully instead of impulsively felt seen. I didn't have to defend my pace or my depth. They were welcome. And being welcomed in that way reshapes how you understand intimacy. I realized that love doesn't always arrive as a revelation. Sometimes it arrives as recognition, as the quiet certainty that you are no longer carrying everything alone, not because someone has taken it from you, but because someone is walking beside you, aware of the weight, respectful of the pace, present enough to share the silence without needing to fill it, present enough to stay grounded in moments that don't demand expression, moments that simply exist and feel complete without explanation. For a long time, I believed that the most meaningful things in life would announce themselves clearly, that when something real arrived, I would feel certain immediately, without hesitation or reflection. But experience has a way of teaching you that truth is often quieter than expectation. It doesn't always stand out at first glance. Sometimes it waits patiently for you to slow down enough to notice it. I had spent years learning how to listen to the world, but not always to myself, and it was in that listening that I began to understand how much I had been overlooking. I learned to be careful with what I offered and who I offered it to, not because I lacked emotion, but because I valued it. I understood that not everyone who wants closeness understands responsibility. Some people are drawn to the idea of connection, not the work of maintaining it. So I became intentional. I paid attention to patterns instead of words, to consistency instead of intensity. I learned that what lasts rarely needs to convince you. Before you, I had made peace with the idea that some paths are meant to be walked alone. I didn't see that as a failure. I saw it as self-respect. I learned how to be present in my own life, how to find meaning in routine, how to grow without an audience. I wasn't waiting in the traditional sense. I wasn't searching every face for something missing. I was becoming someone who could recognize truth if it ever crossed my path. When you appeared, there was no dramatic shift, no sudden transformation. There was familiarity without history, comfort without explanation, a sense that I didn't need to prepare or adjust myself to be understood. You didn't challenge my solitude, you honored it. And in doing so, you created a space where closeness didn't feel intrusive. It felt earned. It felt natural. I noticed how being around you didn't demand effort. Conversations unfolded without performance. Silence didn't need interpretation. I didn't feel the urge to impress or protect. I felt present, fully. And presence has a way of revealing truth. It strips away expectation and leaves only what's real. In that presence, I began to see how much of myself I had been carrying alone, not out of necessity, but out of habit. There was a quiet courage in the way you showed up, not in grand gestures, but in consistency, in the way attention didn't fade with time, in the way respect didn't disappear in moments of disagreement. You listened with intention, you spoke with honesty, and you stayed. That staying mattered more than any promise could. It spoke a language I had learned to trust. I found myself less guarded without realizing when it happened, not because I let my defenses down carelessly, but because they were no longer needed. Trust didn't feel like a leap, it felt like a step forward onto solid ground. I wasn't asking myself whether this would last, I was experiencing it as it was, allowing it to exist without fear of its ending. I began to understand that some connections don't change your direction, they clarify it. They don't pull you away from who you are, they align with it. With you, I didn't feel divided between independence and closeness. I felt integrated, like two parts of my life that had always existed separately, finally acknowledged each other. What surprised me most was how this connection didn't demand constant attention to survive. It grew in the quiet moments, in the ordinary days, in the spaces where nothing extraordinary happened. And yet, it felt extraordinary because of its steadiness, because it didn't rely on highs to feel alive. It simply was. I noticed how my understanding of love shifted without effort. It stopped being something I analyzed or questioned. It became something I experienced. I wasn't looking for reassurance. I wasn't bracing for disappointment. I was present, grounded, aware of how rare it is to feel understood without explanation. That awareness deepened my appreciation rather than my fear. I realized that finding you wasn't about finally reaching something I had been chasing. It was about recognizing something I was ready for, about being in a place where I could meet honesty with honesty, patience with patience, depth with depth. Timing mattered, growth mattered. And when those things aligned, recognition followed naturally. I didn't feel like I had arrived at the end of a journey. I felt like I had entered a space where the journey could be shared without losing its meaning, where movement didn't require urgency, where progress didn't demand proof, where connection existed as a choice, renewed quietly, moment by moment. In tea, I finally understood that some truths don't need to be spoken to be known. They are felt in the way presence lingers, in the way understanding flows without effort, in the way you no longer feel the need to search for what you already recognize as real.